Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I surely appreciate your support. Guys, I build these videos for like-minded folks just like you and I to help us both get to the finish line quicker, but more proficiently, like I always say. I do this video each and every year, guys, is to not put fear, because I think a lot of habitat creations in general are easier than a lot of folks think they are. They're a lot easier to accomplish. But I find that there's so much information out there, at no fault of anybody watching this. There's just so much information out there that I think folks get caught in these, what I refer to as these traps all the time, steering folks down the wrong direction and actually doing more harm to your property than good. So yes, use caution, but don't not do things on your property just because it looks too much, right? Too overwhelming. So these are the habitat building tips, guys. There is a laundry list of tips that I could give you. I try my best to give those a lot of those out here on the channel, guys. But there are just 3, possibly 4, just big tips, big topics that jump out to me each and every year that I think are very easy to think about, to really put into process before you go out on a property and start implementing them, right? So this goes for landowners, possibly other consultants that are watching this, guys. Whatever the case is, just use this format, and I think it will save a lot of mistakes, save a lot of whoopses. It'll get you there quicker, and then you can work off these things. First and foremost, guys, from here down, maybe these are in order, maybe these aren't, but this one, number 1, is definitely in order. The number one thing, the number one tip that I can give you when it comes to building habitat, building correct whitetail and wildlife, especially whitetail habitat, is focusing on doe bedding first, ladies first. Now, I get some kickback on that. There's actually been lawsuits on that years ago, not with me, that said you can't name something a buck bedding and you can't tell people they're going to bed here, this is buck bedding and this is doe bedding. That's hogwash. Here's the deal, guys. There's not a sign on what we're building that says does here, does only and bucks only. Obviously, they could care less about property lines. They don't know property lines. They just know the deer in general, guys, is wired the same way. They're mentally wired the same way, whether you're in the northern part of Canada or the southern tip of Florida. The way that they want to navigate through a community and be social, it doesn't change, excuse me, through the whitetail range, right? The deer itself doesn't change. The area, the region, and human pressure is what changes stuff, right? But the deer itself, I really feel that way. That wired doesn't change. Now, does the rut change in some areas? Is it later because of climate? Yes, we all know that. But when you're building these features, guys, first and foremost, when you're looking for correct habitat, that first 100-yard rim between around or nearest your food sources, your green food sources, your food plots, is what we're looking to build this doe bedding. So notice when I said food plots, guys, is because I didn't say, there's many food sources. A lot of folks make the mistake on building bedding off from large destination food sources. So whether that's ag, whether that's big savanna oak flats, whatever that case is, what you're doing is you're interrupting. You're putting the cart, let's say, right before the horse. You're interrupting the flow of the property. You're interrupting the huntability. That's why I put so much emphasis on that, guys, is because I always tell everybody this, right? You've heard me say this a million times. I won't waste a lot of time on this one, but what I always refer to in my clients, guys, is I always tell folks this: just because it's a God-given opening doesn't mean that it needs to be a food plot, right? You've heard me say this time and time and time again. I'd rather have 0 food plots on a property and know that I could get folks on and off that property and hunt very proficiently, and not have any food plots, because if that food plot is in the wrong spot, it's all for none at that point, right? So there's a lot of properties that I have got to over the years. Some folks take this good, some folks don't. My job is to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. So when I get to these properties and I'm telling you half of this acre food plot, half of this 3-acre food plot has to be shut down because you're hurting yourself getting in and off the farm. Oh, we can't do that. We're going to lose so much food. Well, guys, here's the fact. If you can't get on and off the farm, take the food away, right? It'll help dramatically. That's where does come in, is that first 100-yard rim is not just, one side, any side of that. It's just not this 100-yard rim, 360 degrees, let's say, around a food source. It may be before you start building and enhancing it, but you have to know where you're putting that, you're enhancing it, so you don't compound the problem of a big, beautiful food plot and a bunch of correct habitat, and now you've got a real bad problem because you can't get on and off the farm. So by putting ladies first, guys, it's the first stopping point. It's our first layer, if you will, that first line of defense to bring all of the does out to closest to the food sources. So sad part of it is, guys, is because the deer don't know food or fence lines and stuff like that. They just know correct habitat. What happens when I get to a lot of properties, I'm going to tell you probably 80% of properties that I get to, the nearest correct habitat is because somebody went in the core or way to the back of the property to get away from to hunt this inline movement, right? This bow hunting 101 that we're always taught to be between bedding and food. And it is a great strategy, but it goes so far beyond that, right? A lot of folks build these properties, a 20-acre piece, a 40-acre piece. We go way to the back and we put all the bedding back there and we do all the habitat. Maybe it turned out great. Maybe you did great with hinge cutting and canopy release and this whole deal, but it's all in the back. Well, guess what? All your does have saturated that far. There's no potential way, and the reason folks do that is to get in between that bedding area and that food source. The problem with that is if that's 200 yards, 300 yards down the chain, right, you've taken all of the availability for something potentially to bed back there with bucks. So what I start looking at that is, okay, can we use it? It's not going to go to waste, right? We use that, but we put more habitat, better habitat out towards the food source. Now you are in between a lot more movement than just a one line of movement. Something I talk about with my clients. Just remember, guys, look at where you're putting those does within the first 100-yard rim of a food source. Notice, go back on a bunch of videos, guys, and notice when I say within the first 100-yard rim, I don't mean that it has to start plumb at the edge of that food plot, because now, depending on your access, maybe it does start at the end of the right off the edge of the food plot because you're hunting your transitions on the backside. But if your doe bedding and your transition are working together and you're sliding deer past, bucks past a bedding area or past a food source, just because it's within that first 100-yard rim doesn't mean that it's choked off and the hinges start on the side of it, guys, right? So remember that. Just slide them off. You have to have a way for bucks to slide past these areas without exposing themselves into the food plot. So bedding areas first, guys, within the first 100-yard rim, we're deeming those doe bedding, because if you were able to track does like we're able to identify bucks, through trail cameras, what you'd find, guys, is they're very social, right? They're that social butterfly that you heard me speak of all the time, right? They want to go from, hence the word transition. They transition down that line of travel from food plot to food plot to food plot. And you would be surprised, a lot of folks don't believe that, but you would be very surprised if you congregate correct habitat within the first 100-yard rim of your property, how much of those community areas you can make and how many does you can actually put closest to your food source, which is the first step of taking drama out of the core of a property. So something to seriously think about there, guys. Number 2, guys, is a big one. No debris, no berms on the core side of a food plot. This time of the year, guys, I think a lot of folks are looking to, just because, like I said, it doesn't take long to flip on any social media or YouTube channel or anything. And guys, you heard me say this a lot, is food plots, right? I love food plots. It would be hard for me to not own a property of good size, of any acreage, I guess, that didn't have the availability or a potential spot that I could put a food plot, because it's a huge piece of the puzzle. But if you just flip on a channel, you will find that this food plot word gets a lot of folks in trouble. And what they start doing this time of the year is you go in and you just start building these big, beautiful food plots. Hopefully, Lord willing, they're in an area that's not going to hurt you. And folks start putting we're hunting these food plots a lot of times, right? Which I don't recommend if you follow the channel. And what happens is a lot of folks take this debris and they start putting it on the doe bedding side, your core side of these food sources, and we get real strategic, right? We're going to leave a gap here, we're going to leave a gap there, and we're hanging tree stands on the other side of it so we can force deer to come out of that hole. Guys, to me, it's a very horrible situation, but for a couple reasons. One, the biggest thing is if you put debris on that core side, that debris should be used on the access side, on the outside for screening or something like that. What you'll find is if you put this debris, those brush piles, guys, on the inside of that, you'll push the doe bedding back 30 yards, 40 yards. I've seen it as far as 100 yards in some areas, that the does, deer in general, they just don't want to bed that close, because it's got this dark 3D effect to it, right? Excuse me. And in daylight, that makes these dark holes in there, and they can't see what's in there. They don't want to bed with their backs to it. They don't want to bed anywhere near it. It just takes a layer of the property out. So a lot of properties, guys, 20s, 40s, 60s, 80s, right, that the common Joe in the world own, you don't have 200 yards to give away. You don't have 100 yards to give away. A lot of places we don't have 50 yards to give away, right? So always remember that, guys. Take that debris. It's a way cleaner look to begin with. Take it to the outside. Put it towards your access side. Put it on the outside of the plot. Maybe put it in front of a blind if you are hunting off a corner of a plot, or you're hunting on a shot plot, or you're just using it for a wall of nastiness to get past. Something like that, guys. Use it for that, or get rid of it in general. When you're cleaning these plots out, just get rid of it. Don't put it there. And another thing is, guys, to me, so that's one of them, right? The other thing is this. I see a lot of hunting strategies, like I said, that are tied to that, right? Leaving these openings. And what you're doing, guys, is it may work early season, but what you're doing is you're so far ahead of the does. You're ahead of the does, you're ahead of the movement. It's not a great hunting strategy, right? You can harvest that same buck 200 yards from there and not blow that food source off, and have a lot better encounter, multiple encounters maybe, to get the job done, than you're going to trying to force him through holes in a food plot which you shouldn't be sitting on anyway. So that's a big one for me. It's an eyesore to me. It's got so many negatives, guys. Just remember, don't put debris on the doe bedding side or the core side of any food plot when you are excavating them out. Number 3, guys, this one here is probably the biggest fix, I guess you could say, that I do, or I recommend, or I physically fix myself every year for folks. And like I said, guys, this one here, School of Hard Knocks. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. I did this years ago on a couple properties, and it didn't take me very long to realize. Luckily, I had a logging background, and I did this about one time that I can remember. It was like, that's not going to work. I'm never going to do that again. So luckily, it was on my own property, right? Hence the reason, like I said, learning and doing this on my own property before I mess anybody else's stuff up years and years and years ago. One of the things, or the biggest thing is here, guys, is this canopy removal. When you go into a bedding area, I educate my clients, guys, when we're on the properties, talking on the phone and doing your property. I'm always telling folks this. Remember, I think a lot of folks are starting to understand there's a lot of good information out there. Are you a hinge cut candidate? Are you not? Hack and squirt, stuff like that, right? What application do we need to do? But I think a lot of folks do is they just take this saw, get this hinge cut mindset, and they go in and they make these bedding areas, and don't get me wrong, they look cool when you're doing them. Here's the problem, guys. If that canopy's not removed, a lot of folks just don't like cutting big trees, right? And rightly so. If you're not comfortable with those, hack and squirt them, hire somebody else to do them. But let's say there's a bunch of oaks in there. Sometimes folks just don't want to cut them just because they're oaks, right? So when I get there, I go in and these hinge cuts are in these areas, and the hinge cut themselves might have been great. It might have been in the right place. But here's the problem, they're all dead. And the reason for that is they didn't remove the canopy first. So you actually took the second story maybe down, maybe it was a third story with invasives or whatever you hinged, took it down, and there just wasn't enough sunlight, so your hinge died. So now guess what happens? Now you gotta go in and you gotta remove the canopy. So even if we caught it quick enough, you go in and remove the canopy, you're gonna crush those hinges. There's no good way to take big timber, big 30, 40, 50, 60 foot tops, and lay them into an area without crushing your hard work that you did with your hinge cutting. So now what you do is you smashed it, right? So you set yourself back. So one way or the other, if you don't remove the canopy first, or you try to remove it later, one way or the other, you're going to crush your creations. But even if you're removing invasives and you're not doing any hinge cutting, and you're just doing it with all hack and squirt methods, and you're not touching a chainsaw at all, I recommend doing a little of both. Doing a little canopy removal, doing a little hinge cutting, do a little hack and squirt. Those are the ones that I see that are, at the end of the day, are best bedding areas. Whether it's doe bedding, buck bedding, whatever that case is, that's what I find is the best, right? We're not getting ourselves in trouble with making tornado areas, and they're easy to maintain. We can still backfire through them. We still have some side structure, but this one right here, guys, is huge. So there's, like I said, guys, this list is probably a mile long, right? But these are the top 3 that I really, really encourage you to really look at in depth about why you're doing doe bedding, where you're doing doe bedding, where you're putting debris when you're clearing food plots, and are you removing your canopy first before you're doing any fancy bedding work. So I think these 3 tips really help or can relate to a lot of folks. Thanks, guys.